Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're managing Scope 3 across a large supply chain, you've probably realized that the problem isn't finding another carbon calculator. The problem is finding a system that can actually handle the reality of your supplier network. Hundreds or thousands of suppliers, different data formats, different levels of maturity, different reporting years, different product footprints, different response rates, and a sustainability team that somehow has to turn all of that into one usable picture. In today's video, we're going to look at the main types of Scope 3 data tools, where each one works, where each one starts to break down, and what large organizations should actually look for if they want a process that scales. Let's get into it. The first category is the one almost everyone starts with, spreadsheets. To be clear, spreadsheets aren't bad. For an early Scope 3 inventory, they're genuinely useful. You can export spend data from finance, add supplier names, map categories, apply emissions factors, and get to a first estimate fairly quickly. If you're working with 50 suppliers, or even a few hundred, that may be enough, but large supply chains expose the limitations quickly. You start getting different file versions. Supplier data arrives by email. Someone updates an emissions factor in one workbook but not another. A supplier sends new data 6 months later, and now you have to work out which number should replace which estimate. That's the point where spreadsheets stop being a data system and start becoming a coordination problem, and Scope 3 is already complex enough without adding another one on top. The second category is carbon accounting software. These tools are often much stronger at emissions calculations. They can take spend data, activity data, and other inputs, map them to emissions factors, and calculate an inventory. That solves an important problem. But here's the question large organizations need to ask. What happens before the calculation? If your sustainability team still has to manually collect supplier information through emails and questionnaires, clean it in spreadsheets, and upload it into the platform, you've only automated one part of the workflow. You've automated the calculation. You haven't necessarily solved the supplier data problem. And for large supply chains, supplier data is usually where most of the work sits. Spend data is quick but not supplier specific. Activity data is more representative, and primary supplier data brings you closer to what's actually happening in the supply chain. Mature programs usually use all three at once, rather than relying on a single data type. The next category is supplier questionnaire tools. These are useful because they give you a structured way to send requests and collect responses, which is already better than managing everything through email. But there's another scaling problem here. What exactly are you asking suppliers to do? Imagine you're a supplier working with 30 major customers. One sends you a spreadsheet, another sends you a portal, another asks for a 30-question questionnaire, another wants product carbon footprints, another wants company-level emissions, and another wants the same information you already published in your own sustainability report. That's a lot of duplicated effort from the supplier's side. A tool isn't automatically scalable just because it can send questionnaires to 10,000 suppliers. The real question is whether it reduces the work required from both sides by reusing information where possible, accepting existing disclosures, keeping historical responses, and only asking suppliers for what's genuinely missing. That brings us to one of the most important capabilities for large supply chains: supplier identity. This sounds unglamorous, but it matters enormously. Large organizations often have the same supplier appearing several times in procurement data, one legal entity listed under different names, different subsidiaries buying from different parts of the same supplier group, finance using one identifier while procurement uses another. If your tool treats those as separate companies, your data fragments. You might send the same supplier 3 different requests, calculate their emissions several different ways, or fail to connect supplier reported data to the spend that actually belongs to them. What works at scale is a consistent supplier record that connects procurement information, emissions data, and reporting history together, because Scope 3 data already sits across procurement, finance, suppliers, and logistics rather than inside a single team or system. Now let's talk about supplier prioritization. If you have 10,000 suppliers, you shouldn't engage all 10,000 with the same intensity. You need to know which ones matter most, whether that's highest estimated emissions, highest spend, strategic importance, or suppliers where better data would meaningfully change your inventory. A useful system should help you segment suppliers before engagement even begins. A group of high impact suppliers where you want primary data, a second group where activity data is sufficient, and a long tail where industry averages remain appropriate for now. That's how Scope 3 data actually matures, starting with estimates, improving with activity data, then increasing primary supplier coverage over time. Another capability that matters is data hierarchy. Say you have a spend-based estimate for a supplier, then they provide company-level emissions. Later, they provide a product carbon footprint for the exact product you're buying. The stronger data should replace the weaker estimate in the relevant part of the inventory. That sounds obvious, but at scale it isn't trivial. You need to know which data source is being used, why it was selected, which reporting year it belongs to, and whether the old estimate should still apply elsewhere. A mature tool needs to manage that hierarchy, otherwise you end up with more data, but not necessarily better data, and that distinction matters. Then there's validation. Two suppliers might both submit 5,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and those numbers can look identical while meaning completely different things. One might be reporting total corporate emissions, the other emissions for a single site. One could cover 2025, the other 2023. One might include Scope 3, the other only Scope 1 and 2. The number alone isn't enough. You need the context around it, which means validating reporting year, units, organizational boundary, methodology, and verification status. That's the difference between collecting numbers and collecting usable emissions data. Workflow is probably where sustainability teams feel the pain most directly. Who's been contacted? Who opened the request? Who submitted? Who needs clarification or a reminder? If the answers to those questions live across Outlook, Excel, and someone's personal notes, the program is very difficult to scale. A useful tool should give you one place to see supplier status, invite it through to validate it, and automate the routine follow-up so your team spends its time on the suppliers who genuinely need human engagement. Integrations matter too. A large organization doesn't want to manually export procurement data, clean it, upload it, run calculations, and then move the results somewhere else. A scalable system needs to fit into the existing data environment, procurement, ERP, finance, and business intelligence, because if every reporting cycle starts with another large CSV export and 3 weeks of cleaning, the organization hasn't solved the problem. It's just moved the spreadsheet. Which brings us to perhaps the most important test. Can the tool help you move from measurement to action? A platform that produces a beautiful dashboard but can't tell you where to focus supplier engagement isn't doing enough. The useful questions are which suppliers represent the greatest emissions opportunity, which are already improving, where you're still relying on estimates, and where procurement should focus its next conversation. Those are decision-making questions, and they're what the data is ultimately for. Microsoft's approach to supplier data is a good example here. The point isn't simply that suppliers report emissions, it's connecting supplier sustainability performance with actual procurement decisions. So if you're evaluating a Scope 3 tool for a large supply chain, here's the checklist worth using. Can it ingest the data you already have without creating another manual workflow? Can it identify and maintain consistent supplier records? Can it prioritize suppliers by impact rather than treating everyone equally? Can it combine spend, activity, and primary supplier data intelligently? Can it validate supplier submissions and preserve the methodology behind each number? Can it manage supplier engagement at scale, including status tracking and follow-up? Can it retain historical supplier data so you're improving the inventory rather than rebuilding it every year? And finally, can it turn all of that into decisions for sustainability and procurement teams? Plenty of tools can calculate a carbon footprint. The harder question is whether one can manage the data, suppliers, and decisions behind that footprint across a complex global supply chain. So let's bring this together. Spreadsheets work well when you're getting started. Carbon accounting tools make calculations faster. Questionnaire tools structure supplier requests. But large supply chains need something broader: supplier level data management, prioritization, validation, workflow, historical data, and integration, alongside a clear path from estimates towards better primary data. Scope 3 isn't one dataset. It's many datasets from different parts of the organization and value chain, and the information becomes more useful as it moves from broad estimates towards more specific supplier data. The best tool isn't necessarily the one with the longest feature list. It's the one that removes work from the process while improving the quality of the decisions you can make. less time cleaning files, less time chasing suppliers, less time rebuilding inventories, more time engaging suppliers, planning reductions, and actually decarbonizing the supply chain. If you're managing Scope 3 across a large supplier network, I'd love to know what part of the process causes the most friction for your team. Supplier response rates, procurement data, validation, integrations, or simply managing the volume? Let us know in the comments. And if you'd like more practical guides on Scope 3 data, supplier engagement, and corporate decarbonization, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.